Commonly, when scientists write a paper, we hear coaches say, "So what? What does it actually mean to my practice?" So, what I'd like to do in this next series of videos, I'm going to do it in a set of 3 videos, is talk you through some projects we did with coaches from collision sports. And essentially, what we wanted to do was understand the tackle. And we worked at it from understanding the skill of the tackle, but also the physical qualities that influence tackling ability, and then finally, how fatigue influences this skill. I really hope you enjoy these 3 videos, because this is really probably my best example of how coaches and sports scientists can work together to solve some problems. One of the questions that our defensive coordinator came to us with was, how do I know whether I'm actually improving the tackling ability of my players? So we wanted to work out what actually constitutes a good tackle. What are the factors that contribute to effective tackling ability in collision sport athletes? So we set out with this project in mind, essentially to look at tackling technique, to look at injury risk and playing experience, and also to assess how training impacts these things. So we developed a standardized tackle assessment, and I'll talk a little bit more in terms of what that tackle assessment involved. We looked at training, both in terms of short-term and long-term training. We analysed game-specific tackling performances, and then we related the off-field assessment of tackling ability to on-field performance in terms of the number of tackles that players made, the number of ineffective and missed tackles, and also the number of dominant tackles. Tell us a little bit more about the tackle from a coaching perspective. What I'd like to do now is bring on Peter Ryan. Now, Peter Ryan has played over 200 elite rugby union and rugby league games all around the world. He's worked as the defensive coordinator for the Brisbane Broncos, North Queensland Cowboys, ACT Brumbies, and the Queensland Reds. Rhino, what do you see when you look at this video of this one-on-one tackle technique?
There was 2 major points that we really want to focus on. Is one is what the target is, so actually what TC is looking at here, and then also what he's doing with his body shape, and then on top of that, does he have fast feet at the point of contact? Now, fast feet, we all know that we're receiving contact, and it's not really possible to have actually fast feet at the point of contact. But what it does enable us to do is in that mindset that we are powering up through the actual contact point from, and I suppose you could say that there's a portion of it comes from before the contact, during the contact, and then after the contact. If you're trying to teach someone how to tackle, that this immediately comes to my mind as soon as I see this body shape, is that he's forcing the ball carrier to go to the place that he wants him to go. So he's forcing him to change directions to his left shoulder based simply on what his body shape is. That in itself is a good cue point for coaches to look at in terms of tracking. And tracking in itself is absolutely integral in terms of being able to change what the person carrying the ball is doing.
So when you talk about body shape and forcing the ball carrier to go in a certain way, what's the defender doing here to force him into where he wants him to go?
As you can see with TC, his body weight is forward of centre. He has his majority of his weight on the ball of his left foot, and you'll notice that he has his hands into the position that enable him to actually, when he makes contact, to make good arm grab and punch wrap around the body. So everything that he's doing is absolutely near perfect body alignment. But if it was directly in behind TC, you would almost say that you could draw a straight line down from the top of his head through his spine, down in between his legs, basically to the ground. And what that would mean to me is that his body is in alignment in terms of being square to get through the contact. So that being said, really a good picture to see. And you'll notice what he's doing with his head and eyes. You can see clearly that he is looking at a target point. We want them to go in a certain spot, but then what do we actually look at to make the actual contact? So there has to be a target point that he is looking at. And the best way to describe the target point would be the center of gravity of the opposition. And so that being the case, in every given tackle, especially in rugby league and rugby union, is that we're trying to stand the player upright. And you might say, well, why do you want to do that? And the reason behind that is once we get that individual to take away their speed, get them standing upright so their body weight is, or their center of gravity is above their feet, then we can do whatever we want with them. Notice when he makes contact, his hips are actually a little bit left forward as opposed to right being forward and being square. But what he actually does, upon contact, he makes a small half step. This is the natural sequence of events. And this half step then squares his hips up through the tackle. And then he is able to, because he's already done all the hard work, to power up through that contact point and then dominate the individual that he's making contact with. So really a couple of key points there. One is the tracking to get the contact. Two is making sure that we're hitting the target we're looking at. And you can clearly see that TC did hit the target. Maybe it actually might have been a touch high, but still, because of his body shape, he's able to do that. And then obviously speed his feet up before, during, and after contact to the point where he is then dominant and takes the guy to ground, lands on top of the individual carrying the ball.
So just to reiterate, what we were able to do was to take Peter's coaching cues and then apply them with some standardized tackling criteria, so technical criteria. And the technical criteria included contacting the target in the center of gravity, contacting the target with the shoulder, having a square and aligned body position, having leg drive upon contact, so before, during, and after contact. The critical one was watching the target onto the shoulder so that our tackler didn't drop their head into contact, and having the center of gravity forward of the base of support. Now, when we used this criteria, we compared higher level and lower level players. And if you look at the figure on the left, the higher skilled players had much better tackling ability than the lesser skilled players. So what it tells us is that it has good discriminative validity. It has the ability to discriminate good and poor players. Now the figure on the right shows that there's essentially no change in tackling ability until players become really experienced. So it shows the relationship between playing experience and tackling ability. So there's a couple of ways that you could interpret this graph. One is that you could say it takes a long time to change tackling ability. That's one possible explanation. But another explanation is that perhaps if you want to play a large number of elite level games, then you have to have good tackling ability. So we can't say whether it's cause and effect, whether improvements in tackling ability allow these players to play more games, but we can say there's a relationship there, that if you have better tackling ability, you tend to play more elite level games. Here's a bit of a breakdown on our key criteria that we developed with the coaches and the criteria that are the strongest determinants of good tackling ability. So we can see that there's a large difference in the ability of higher skill and lesser skill players to contact the target in the center of gravity. They tend to have better leg drive on contact. They watch the target onto the shoulder, and they're better able to have their center of gravity forward of their base of support. So this indicates that these are really key criteria in separating your higher skilled and your lesser skilled players in terms of tackling ability. When we looked at the relationship between what we measured off-field in our standardized assessment and then what happens in-game performances, this is a relationship between tackling technique measured off-field and competition tackle events. You can see that there's a strong relationship there. As players had better tackling ability, they tended to make more tackles during a game. Now, what this could indicate is that your best tacklers are put in the positions where they're going to make the most tackles. But we can also look inside this a little bit more, and on the left we have the proportion of tackles missed during a match, and on the right we have the proportion of dominant tackles made during a match. And you can see here that players with better tackling technique, from the standardized tackle assessment, tended to miss fewer matches during a match, and they tended to make more dominant tackles during a match. So what it tells us is that what we're measuring off field is actually predictive of what can happen on field, the athlete's performance, the player's performance on field. So just to summarize, players with better tackling ability tended to have faster leg drive into contact. They had their weight forward of their feet. They were able to watch the target onto their shoulder. And the tackle assessment was able to discriminate the higher and lesser skilled players. They tended to make more competition tackle events. So players with better tackling ability had better involvement in the game. And importantly, they missed fewer tackles and they made more dominant tackles during a match. Thanks very much for listening. In my next vlog, I'm going to discuss how physical qualities can contribute to effective tackling ability and what this means for strength and conditioning coaches.